You're listening to Head Voice, bringing you inside the minds of singers and sound creators who are redefining what it means to make music with the voice. I'm Kayla.
I'm Anthony.
And I'm Evan, and we are back from a very exciting weekend at SoJam in Durham, North Carolina. Anthony, Kayla, and I had a great time teaching and attending classes and workshops, watching the showcases, and we actually got to meet a bunch of you, which was awesome. A lot of listeners actually showed up for our live discussion on finding creative direction with our friends Charlie Arthur, Mel Daneke, and Alex Green. The format of this episode doesn't fully cover their backgrounds and story, but if you're interested in those, we've recorded individual episodes with all of them that will link in the show notes.
During the panel, we talked about self-starting and how to take the first step in a creative endeavor, from finding inspiration and using it to develop a creative voice to staying passionate as a creator. It's a really fun and inspiring episode, and we hope you enjoy this conversation on finding creative direction.
Alrighty, hello, welcome to this thing. If you didn't know, we're recording. This is a panel on finding creative direction. We are Head Voice. We are a podcast, and we talk to singers and sound creators and loopers and a cappella people like these fine folk. So just wanted to give them all a quick introduction. Sitting to my left is Alex Green. He is one half of Plaid Productions. He was in the Tufts Amalgamates, and he does editing and is good at things. This is Mel Daneke. She is the owner of Viridian Productions. She was in Premium Blend at Ithaca College, and she does good drums and recording, and go check her out. And then lastly, we have Charlie Arthur, who is I would say just a creative based in LA. He does beatboxing and the singing and the bassing, and he has professional groups. He performs with a bunch of groups, is working on some things that I think we'll talk about as we keep going. I think we're just going to kick it off. So finding creative direction is a very broad thing, but we wanted to talk to these people specifically because I feel on some level all of you are very self-startery in the way that you got started, in that you kind of just took a plunge doing your own thing in your own separate ways. On the car ride down, we were talking with our friend Justin over here of how, when we're, you're our age, that first step is the hardest one to take. Was there anything that kind of, you all are doing on your own separate pursuits? What was the thing that kind of made you think, oh, I can do this, if you ever had that moment?
Dave Sperandio. He's also in the audience at the moment, but I promise that's actually true. When I had just graduated from college, I was like, I don't know if I can do this thing. There was this thing called the RARB forums back in the day, where I posted on it hey, I'm available to edit some stuff for no money. Please give me some of it so it doesn't feel like no money for my rent. And Dave was like, you're a ginger, I'll take a chance on you. And so he did, and here we are. Basically that was just you look like you want to try this and you want to do it for a living. So here's a chance. Don't fuck it up.
Did you know that immediately when you
he was pretty upfront about that. Yeah.
But that you wanted to do it as a career?
Yeah. I mean, I was always interested in recording things, and it just so happened that I would just continue getting into stuff where, there happens to be recording involved in this other pursuit that you're doing sometimes. Oh, this group that since you record, you want to learn how that works. You want to just go sit in. Oh, you're here all the time. You may as well learn how to actually do the recording. Oh, you know how to do the recording. You should just do it, and I'll go do dishes in my kitchen. That happened. Oh, cool, you're doing that, so why don't you just try editing some stuff? Oh, you don't like your job. You should just do this as a job. All right, sure. And that's how it progressed. I was doing it before in high school, and then I decided to do it as a job. That's the short version. There you go.
That's how you did it.
Yeah. I did it. That's how I did it.
You did it. That's how you did it. Well, that's also important. Is taking the plunge to just do it. And I think a lot of people here are afraid of what. Let me back up. I was in an a cappella group like everyone at college, though. I never did anything like this in high school. And I was interested in choral and music, and it was just all choral music. And then in college, I was the sole beatboxer for Premium Blend at Ithaca College, which is an all-female group. And that's kind of where I fell in love with beatboxing because I'm a percussionist by nature with other percussion instruments. I just fell in love with the fact that I could be a percussionist without actually using any other instruments, just by myself. And then I found this opportunity to audition for a group called Musée right after college. Mm-hmm. And I had no plans after college. and wasn't really, looking. The only thing that I really wanted to do was continue with my pursuit of writing my own music and production and wanting to be in the music business world, in the industry world. I had studied opera and performing, which is another love of mine, but I really wanted to dive into this world that felt kind of like a mystery to me, and I wanted to know it more. And then this opportunity came up, and I was like, wow, I really want to just keep beatboxing, and I want to be involved in this professionally. So I got into that, and from there stemmed this whole world and this whole world of acapella, that this can be an opportunity to make this a career, whether you're just not just a performer, but whether you're a performer or a producer, arranger. You can wear all these hats and still make a living doing it, which is really exciting. And I think the big part about kind of self-starting is making sure that you have a network of people to reach out to, and a mentor, and people that you can ask questions to. And I think that was the most important part on my journey, was having that person or people that you can reach out to and say, does this sound good? Or what do you think I should do next? I really want to do this, but I don't know if this is going to be the right choice. And those people are really integral to taking that self-starter step, because they are the self-starters too.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I definitely feel as though what Mel said about wearing multiple hats resonates with my story more than really anything else, just because going through the different groups and projects that I've been a part of, I've been asked to step into pretty much every single role that is needed in order to bring these things to life at one point or another. And because of that, I've been able to do, like, as Mel said, like, not only just make a living, but make a living doing a cappella, which is the weird, like, unicorn that people have trouble manifesting or visualizing. And I think that it helps if you are very, very, very good at something to specialize. But if you are just looking to do a cappella full time, you just have to go with what opportunities sit in front of you and say yes to them and make the most of them, and then learn and grow from there. And the other side of it is, because, like, that can be very isolating, just being like, okay, cool, I just spent 3 hours of no one else's time but my own, like, working on this arrangement that probably no one will hear. Why, like, what am I supposed to do now? And then you suddenly say, like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to start practicing, like, modes, because that's a thing that people say that you need to know. But the thing that within that, like, constant rabbit hole that gives me motivation and helps me remember why I continue doing it is to ask people for help. And it's the hardest skill for me to learn, but consistently is the one that yields the best results. Because when people see not only you looking out for yourself within the context of, like, your own wellness, but also within, like, the wellness of, like, a community standpoint, it becomes much less about you as a person and the work that and more about the work that you're doing. So I think for me, it's a combination of, like, spending time devoting hours to the things that I want to develop for myself, but also contextualizing it with, like, the people around me that are important, that are doing the same, that are important to me, that are doing the same thing.
Can I touch on one of the things that Charlie was just talking about? He mentioned wearing many hats, but then also finding the time to devote to yourself and your personal view of the craft. I think that's really important, and even especially important. You do need to understand all the various pieces of a project as it comes together, and, like, heck, try your hand at video editing if you have no idea how that side of the thing works. But I think every one of us up here has, among those many hats, one thing that you're like, but that's my thing. That's the thing that gives me the most joy when I just do it by myself. No matter whether or not anyone else hears it, like that arrangement that needed modal work or whatever. That's the kind of thing where you're like, I did this. No one else is going to hear it. That's fine, because that one little aspect is the thing that is my kernel of purpose within this field that I find is, like, if anyone's seen that, like, 4-way Venn diagram of, like, the Japanese concept of ikigai, that's the thing that most people don't happen to match up. Like, they don't get their kernel of passion inside that four-way intersection of
Wish we could flash that on the screen.
what is it like? The
We
world
have screens now.
I wish.
the world needs it. You're good at it. You can be paid for it, and something else.
It fulfills you.
And it fulfills you.
Well, I think a big part of that too, what you're touching on too, is kind of circles on like finding your sound and finding what is your creative direction. So I'm just curious, like for you each personally, if there has been particular musicians or just things in your life that have kind of inspired and helped you define who your sound is, what your sound is.
I can answer
and-
for Charlie.
and-
Snarky Puppy and
Yeah.
Wolfpack.
Maybe sound's not the right word,
You're
but
not- you are not
just like creative voice.
I mean, so yes, to literally just reiterate what Alex just said, I moved to LA to explore like progressive jazz music
Mm-hmm.
after listening to Snarky Puppy. And it just so happens that there is a ridiculously tight-knit community out there of people that just spend their time like gigging and writing every single day, and they are making so much progress so quickly, just like hanging out in each other's apartments. And it's not only like the devotion to the theory of it, but it's also like the devotion to the community and like the establishment of like saying this is unconventional and it only works because we have all like put in a seed and are like constantly watering this plant or this tree. But I mean, yeah, I think for me, it's mostly just finding that sense of community and using that to push projects forward. And I remember hearing a few years ago something along the lines of like you end up being 1/5 the 5 people that you spend the most time with. So like that ends up like creating who you are. And so whether or not that is like mathematically or scientifically valid,
Sure.
The sentiment rings true enough for me to know that if I surround myself, even if it's just like what I listen to or with whom I speak, it helps me find my direction, basing it off of people that I relate to or want to relate to.
Yeah. Love that.
I know for you, you're constantly, Mel, that you're constantly like looking and talking to like a bunch of new percussionists, and you're like going to like different shows. Like I'd love to like hear a little bit about that, because you have so many influences and you're finding more all the time.
Yeah. So I definitely go to a lot of concerts and shows and stuff like that. I live in Austin, Texas, so there's there's a lot of music there, tons of music. It's the live music capital of the U.S. A band every single night, anywhere you go. There's tons of venues, so it's really easy to be exposed to a lot of music. Specifically, there's a lot of world music down there. If you came to my world music class today, we talked a lot about samba music, Brazilian music, Latin, Afro-Cuban beats and rhythms and stuff like that, which to me has been very inspiring recently. And I play in the Austin Samba Escola, the Austin Samba Ensemble, which is really fun. And it's drumming and dancing, samba drumming and dancing. We do all sorts of different types of rhythms from Brazil and different types of music from Brazil. But that's been really inspiring in my own music recently. And also, I mean, on top of that, I draw inspiration from other vocal percussionists or other producers too, who have kind of paved the way for things to be possible. Like, one of my closest friends is also a mentor of mine, Angela Longo. She kind of showed me that certain things in production were possible and that there's really no limit, and that you could still have fire in a mix and still have fire in a piece of production in a song, while also having a lot of nuances in the percussion and having it feel like, you're running through a market, or you're jazzy Beyonce, something, And so because of that, being inspired by other producers and being inspired by the music I listen to, and then fusing that with my own like dark electronic love of that sort of Bjork and Grimes and all that sort of dark bedroom pop stuff, has kind of shaped, I guess, my sound and the way that I like to work with other groups and artists as far as that stuff goes, especially my percussion roots. I'm very focused on, in the production, very focused on wanting to expand what the beatboxer has and adding a little bit of myself in it.
So I'm a former scene kid. Yeah. Yeah, well, Long Island, Jersey, it's the thing. So I like really started paying attention to music and where it came from and its like general soundscape amongst like lots of things that were distorted, bloopy things, and like a whole lot of space and soundscapes that were inevitably to serve a really melodramatic, kind of ridiculous in hindsight story, but still crafted in such a way that it like they knew that they were making art, even if the art was based around. So I look back at a lot of that stuff, like from the most lo-fi, like listening back to early Brand New and realizing they must have recorded it on like 2 mics in a literal garage, or this band called As Tall as Lions that was all like really ambient jazz and trance influenced indie emo, which was like really bizarre the first time I heard it, and I was like, I don't know how to feel about this. Where are the guitars and the whining? And then I was like, wait, this is better. And that sort of started my transition away from just like that little subgenre because I was an angsty kid, and into more just like taking music a little more seriously.
Well, what you're saying right now is like reminding me that like, of the reason that we all got into music, I'm assuming is because it's the thing that brings all of us joy, and that like, and everybody on the stage right out of school was like in a group immediately, like a professional, semi-professional group of some sort. Like how do you, obviously, you're working and you're able to find joy in that work, but then you're also, you have the things that Charlie's video of Shofuken, however you say that, you need to watch that, like check out a musée thing. But like you're doing things that also, scratch that itch. Can you kind of talk about maintaining that and not losing sight of that kind of creative direction?
Oh man, you always have to find. I think it comes back to the kernel I was talking about. You got to find your kernel of satisfaction in somehow in everything you're working on, even if you have to, let's say, transform what that kernel is temporarily. Like there are always times as a professional working in a combination creative and technical field where you're asked to do something or asked to work on a song, and you're just like, this song is butt. But I will make it less butt in the ways that make me excited. And you always have to find that little thing that's like, even if it's just like, man, I made that kick drum sound tight. Like,
Plaid Productions make it less butt.
I like that. The Plaid pilot poop prevention program.
You toned the butt. You made the butt tight.
Yeah. It's Plaid Productions, the Brazilian butt lift of acapella production.
That's like Birdie and Plaid together. Yeah. Brazilian butt, there we go. Wow, we've traveled.
We've taken a trip.
As long as we put this behind us.
Hey! But so coming back to Evan's question, it really is about finding whatever, even in the things that either are just steps along the way that are really tedious or are toward a specific small like intermediate goal, be it like finishing a song, finishing an album, whatever, that you're just like, ugh, I cannot get behind this. You got to find the one thing, because there's always, if you're doing this and you're good at what you're doing, there's always that one little piece of something that you can pull out of anything you're doing. I imagine there have been arrangement commissions where you're like, this is dumb. Or no?
Never.
No?
We would never say that publicly on a podcast.
I wouldn't.
It's just
I'm not
never
asking
been.
you for which ones it was, or like I'm not telling you which albums that I latched onto the fact that the kick drum sounded great, even if nothing else did. Those exist. It's fine. We are performing a service. We have to accept that we are working on other people's stuff, and sometimes the other people want you to work on it and aren't up to snuff with their own ambitions. Let's say they have ideas that they can't quite execute, and you have to help them along the way. Find your kernel. I'm going to come back to it.
So, if I can comment on this question, I recently moved out of a studio apartment, which was the first time that I'd ever lived alone. I lived there for 1 year and 2 months. And all of the rooms were condensed into one space. Like the kitchen was probably like the size of these 2 chairs. And there was like a closet. And then everything else was just a box. And I had to spend a lot of time figuring out, and I'm sure this is something that a lot of people go through. This is not an unconventional problem, but like figuring out how to literally like compartmentalize the things that were related to, like work. Like I had my work table, or I had like a place where I would write, or a place where I would sit and read. But it was all within 2 feet from one to the other. And I like failed a lot of times and like let the spots bleed into one another, and then they became too ambiguous for me to know what to do with them, and I found myself in a funk. And I think that the same like sentiment can be applied to, like, for example, my hard drive, which has all of the files for like my personal projects as well as all of the clients that I work with. And I think the one thing that I constantly try to remind myself in order to try to I suppose keep my head on straight as far as getting things done both for myself and for clients is to just keep them organized and separate. Like they can exist in the same space, but they have to be treated with the same amount of care, so that there is always like the option to like be in a neutral spot. Like I learned the phrase like clearing to neutral not long ago, and I really liked it. Just like having like the space where like it's like a blank desktop and there are no windows open, or like there are no dirty dishes in the sink. It's just completely plain, so that as soon as you approach it, you can just find what you want, do what you need, and then put it back and leave. So I think that's one side of it. And I had another side of it, but I think it evaded me. So it's only a one-sided thing for right now.
And kind of assisted chaotic energy to it. Like things seem to come from nowhere, and so you need to have a more concrete space where, let's say, those things can collect and reach you.
Yeah, well, I mean, we also live in a time where it's very easy to be disorganized, like in the best of ways. Like if I were to go through my voice memos right now, I would cry. Because there would be like memories of things that would make me cry next to like auditions that I've sent in that were just like voice memos, and there's just no, like, it's all clutter. And that's just one example. But I think that is something that is becoming more and more present. And the only way to combat it when like my physiological needs are under concern is to find a space and like separate things out so that I have some sort of neutrality to the things that I'm working. But like not only the industry in which we live and breathe, but also like the time period that we currently exist very much are like pro entropy.
Yeah. Chaos is all around you, and so you need to find your little place where you can control it a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm shifting gears a little bit, but just to go back to the main creative direction focus, I just wanted to ask, most of you are always working on something, whether it's arranging something, producing something, songwriting, maybe some of you. So I'm just curious, like, when you're working on something and you're not feeling it and you're like, I haven't found my kernel, like, I don't understand this thing, I don't get it. Like, how do you stay motivated, stay inspired, and like ultimately get through that fog until you produce something that you're happy with?
Again, for me, like I'm sure it's different for everyone, but I think it's knowing when you are in a lull and connecting with yourself as soon as possible so that you can redirect yourself. Like there are a lot of projects that I have that are half-baked or incomplete, but I'm okay with it because I know that the reason that I left it was to do something else. Mm-hmm. Like if the answer to that problem is for me to just go, and just sit there for however knows how long and like scroll for a little while, then ultimately that will get like that weighs much more heavily than being distracted by something else. And so I think the first thing that I try to do in those scenarios is just see if there's something else that could command my attention, that would still keep me moving in a direction that I'm looking to move. Because then it's very possible that you'll get it out of the way, you'll feel good about yourself, you'll look at this thing and say, oh, right, that's what I was doing, and jump right back in.
Yeah.
I think my greatest foe when I'm producing and arranging and writing my own music is time. And I think a lot of that is because I can look at a project, know exactly what I want to do, but knowing that it's going to take me a long time to do it is what hinders my wanting to just jump in, because sometimes I don't know where to start. I know exactly where I'm like, this could be that. And I see the broad picture. But then when it comes to all the details within the fabric, knowing that I have to spend those take time to nuance everything so that it does come together really well is what keeps me from sometimes even sitting down at the computer and starting it. And then even when I'm in the middle of a project, knowing that there's also bits and pieces that I still need to work out with things, whether it's, a great song or an arrangement I'm not really feeling, that can be daunting. And the way that I work through it is usually just putting it down for like a few days and just sleeping on it and doing something else that's going to fill my well, because normally in a time like that, I'm doing either focusing way too hard on it, and I'm not doing other things that are inspiring me enough. Yeah. And I think that's where I lose my focus, is I'm thinking too hard, or I'm not allowing myself to fill my own inspiration well if this isn't filling it. And I need to allow myself to be inspired and to look at other music and listen to other things so that I can bring that element to what I'm producing that might not really fuel or like fire me up as a producer, so that I can at least try. But yeah, because I'm a type of person that does things 100%, and if I'm not doing 100%, I'm like, what's the point? Yeah. So that's my battle with it, or my two battles, I guess. But yeah, I end up having to get through it, because most of the time it's a project I'm getting paid for. So it's like, okay, you know what? This is part of being a professional. You have to do it, and most of the time it works out, which is nice. Yeah.
I think Mel and Charlie are both specifically talking about changing gears. It's this weird concept of you will always. It's this sort of the same idea as you find the thing that you're looking for in the last place you look, which duh. But related to that, I often find that when I cannot find an object, I find it while instead looking for something else. And that applies to small things in my house, and also specific creative directions. And you have to know when this is sort of exhausted yourself, because there's another side of it that I'll get to in a second. You just say in my case, say you're having trouble with the rhythm section of a song. Well, okay, leave the drums and bass alone. Obviously, you're not quite understanding what they're doing, especially not maybe in isolation. Concentrate on something else. Figure out what the upper voices are supposed to sound like, what their functions are, how they're going to tell the story of the song, and then get back to how the rhythm section is going to support it. And you might figure it out while you're working on you could be playing a single soprano part, and maybe some combination of where she's breathing and some bleed from the click that somehow got into the recording, and where you happen to hit stop and start again will be oh, duh, the bass needs to be here, and I need to offset the kick a little bit and add reggaeton snare or something. Who knows what you're gonna think of, but you're gonna be oh, that's what I need. The other side of that's sometimes also looking for stuff in other places, even actively or passively, that can also still get you nowhere, and then you just hit the same creative block in a different part of whatever you're doing. Sometimes, again, this is what Mel is saying, you need to just know that okay, well, if I'm going to get into that, to borrow a term that some people were using earlier, into that flow state where time disappears and you're just going, you sometimes need to push into it. Sometimes it happens naturally, sometimes you're just I'm starting and I'm in the zone, this is great. And sometimes it's I need to get in the zone because this needs to get done. And then you just have to do it. At a certain point in any creative endeavor, project, whatever, the actual barrier of just doing it is the most important one. Even if if the barrier is just calling it done. You've been arranging a song for 6 hours, you're pretty happy with it, but you feel something is missing and you don't know what it is. Honestly, in that specific case, 90% of the time it's hearing other people sing it, and you're oh, okay, that was great once I just called it done and sent it to people and they did it and it was awesome, and I just wasn't hearing that.
One thing I will say is that at least when I'm songwriting, just because it's that this sort of question type of inspiring, what do you do when you're in a rut? When I'm songwriting anything and I get in a place where I'm this sucks, or I'm just like, I just can't write anything. Like I can write a melody, but I can't write any lyrics, and it's driving me nuts. I can't write. Yeah, I don't music. I don't music at all. I just don't even think about it. I like need to do something completely different. I have to go on a hike. I have to go soul cycle. I have to go, I have to do anything else that's going to like at least pump me up as like a physical human and make my inspiration a little bit less cerebral and more like primal and like a little bit more physical, so that I feel inspired that way. And then once I feel good about that, my inspiration slowly comes back.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wanted
That's a fun
to
tip.
hit on that.
Yeah. You all had really good points in terms of like trying to find that in yourself. I think also I'd love to hear a little bit about how all of us have been like arrangers or producers or directors, and like we've had that creative drive. And I think some of the people in the room also, like, part of why you're here is you're trying to bring that out in other people. How do you communicate and extrapolate that creativity in the people that you're working with, and how can you get that communication back from them? Like where does that crossroads meet in terms of spreading your creativity with others?
For me, I'll keep prefacing it with this just because I know that it's going to be different for everyone, but I recognize that a lot of the creative work that I do is not actually creative. It's a lot of like math. It's a lot of like you take off most of the layers, like, and the best example that I can give is if I'm arranging on a tight deadline, I will first start by putting in everything that I know will not change, like all the things that are second nature, that it's basically just like busy work, just putting in like syllables or like bass textures or just like creating the outline of the arrangement, so that when I have all that finished and I've just put in all this hard work, the only thing that's left for me is like the fun part, which is the part that people typically tend to resonate with more, because there aren't as many wrong answers in that world. And like the world of like, how do you notate music? It's a little bit more strict if you're giving it to someone that you don't know, or like you don't have an idea of how they're going to interpret it. But if in terms of just like, okay, cool, how do I want to voice this chord? It's a lot more open-ended. So by stripping away a lot of the layers of like, okay, this is where the melody sits and this is where the bass reacts in response to that melody. And like, these are some basic like hits that are like harken back to the original song. Past that, it's just saying, okay, cool, well now we have like 2 or 3 moments really. And do you want to like create a motif, or do you want to try to borrow a motif from what we already have here? And then suddenly, as you like pull away a lot of these layers, it becomes a lot more digestible. And I think when explaining that to other people, it's just a matter of saying like, this is what you already know. I promise. You know how to count to 4. I really, really have enough faith in you to know that you know how to count to 4. And then you say, okay, cool. So if you know how to count to 4, then you also know how to like stop on 2 and stop on 4 and like put something in there. You can probably figure out the space between 2 and 3 and like put something in there as well. And then suddenly like you have one dimension and you start working in another one. And it's just like coming to these consensus with people. Where as long as you can remain on the same page, then they're not going to veer away, because right now you're just agreeing. Mm-hmm. And then once it gets to the point where it's time to ask a question, when it's not just like second nature, then that is, I think, like the nature of just like creativity is just like answering questions. So then once everything is laid out, you pose a question and see how they respond.
Yeah, I especially like that, the beginning part of like doing all of the busy work first. That applies to so many things, both in the actual creation and the learning about creating and learning your tools. Yes, it's really super useful if you can put together like the basic technical parts of a mix, for example, before you get started on doing the actual creative stuff, like setting what space something is in, adding creative more than just sound shaping in a basic way effects. But in the same way also, that can apply to learning about what your tools are. You wouldn't paint a picture and call yourself a professional like painter if you didn't know the names of colors. Like you can still be like, oh, I look at that thing over there, and that is like a dark slate-ish river color.
Now you're speaking my language.
Yeah, there we go. In the same way that you wouldn't like that would sort of be the same as explaining like how to change the EQ on a voice, as like I made it more, and this is useful but not professional in the most specific sense. I made it sound like that person was more kind of like a trumpet in a closet. Like, sure, that's a descriptor, but as a professional, you also want to know, like, okay, no, that means I added a little bit at 700 and I should probably get rid of that so it's not quite as honky. You need to know the rules before you break them. And I think that applies sort of the same way to the actual creation as well as the learning of the creation, learning the process that you're going through to create. So, like, again, learning the tools and then figuring out, like Charlie said, like, what are the really, really basics that I need to just do so that then I can do the other stuff. So, like, putting down a bass texture for you would be the same as for me, like, color coding my tracks so that I know what I'm looking at in a mix session.
I think we're like almost at the end of this little panel here. I just want to go and do a version of the question that we ask at the end of the podcast. Can you, I don't want to put any of you on the spot, but like, can you think of one person that you admire that like was good at reaching their own creative potential and why you think that they did that? It can be right now, in history, whatever. I don't know if that's too hard, but
Give me more than one person.
yeah.
If you need.
Yeah. A group, a person.
Yes.
Nice.
All right. We've gotten that far. So there's this artist, and I said her once. There's an artist called Grimes. I love her. And the reason I love her is because she sings on her stuff, but she's not a singer. She doesn't really say that she's a singer, but she really didn't know much about production, anything. And now she's like creating synths for those roller
Seaboard
blocks,
yeah.
rolly block things. Yeah, she's creating synths for that now. So, right?
Wait, you're talking about the Seaboard Rise?
Yeah, that and there's
The
rolly
MIDI.
blocks that are like these little electronic things. Oh, we'll talk.
Totally cool. Look it up.
They're really cool. But they run out of battery really quick. But all right, whatever. So Grimes. The reason I love her is because she wasn't so concerned about what everyone else was thinking about her, which was like, she's dumb, she doesn't really know anything. Like, we'll help her. Like, we'll help you, poor soul who doesn't know much. And she was like, yeah, give me all this information. Like, I clearly need help. And, you know, her live shows way early in the day were not great. There's a lot of mistakes in their live shows, but she's committing to them. And from there, she went from this like KEXP in Seattle radio show on the floor with like a Juno and a 404 sampler, and then a microphone and a vocal performer thing with reverb and stuff, to like now playing at big festivals.
Yeah.
Just because she kept, even though her music is very super weird and electronic and out there, she kept going the course of what she thought she wanted to express, regardless of her ability at the time, and kept growing and growing and growing. And then, you know, she started playing South by Southwest, and then people started to notice her, and she got off of her small label, and then Jay-Z picked her up. And it's this whole building upon the know. And that's an educational philosophy is you start with what you know, and then build upon that and build upon that. And it's a small spiral that turns into a bigger spiral of knowledge. And I think that is something that inspires me and is a person that I constantly try to model myself after, because if I don't know something, there's a channel for me to figure that out and then continue my knowledge further with that sort of thing, which I think, especially in the electronic world, I want to do more with acapella. So I think she's an awesome artist to look into as far as getting to know.
Yeah, and then we'll lightning round it for you two. If
Sorry.
You don't mind.
Okay, I mean,
no,
if we're,
it's all good.
I'll just keep it on that same sort of vein. Weirdly, Dave Grohl, because he's been making rock music for like 30 years now, when pretty much undeniably the pop world has moved kind of away from it, which they shouldn't have because it's dope. And like, he sort of is the same way. He still contests that he's like, I'm not a singer. I sit down in the studio in the control room and record all my takes on like whatever mic is there. And I'm like, you fool. Taught himself a whole bunch of instruments, taught himself how to engineer until he hooked up with Butch Vig, who has produced a whole bunch of stuff for the Foo Fighters now. And he basically just decided, I'm going to do this and I'm going to learn how. I'm already good at drums. I'm bad at everything else. I will learn that.
And he's still innovating. Like, he just put out that thing where he plays 27 instruments or whatever in like this loop thing. Like,
Yep.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
So I'll provide a non-music example, just because I've been watching a lot of documentaries lately, and I recently watched Won't You Be My Neighbor?
Mm-hmm.
And I recognized nearly immediately that Fred Rogers was a huge creative inspiration for me, just because he knew exactly who he was and recognized that he had a platform to hold tight to that and hold fast to it. And people commended him and listened. And he continued doing it and did not change.
Amazing. Cool. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Alex, for doing this. Thank you all for sticking around. This will be online if you want to listen to it. That's all we got.
All right.
Thanks. There's stickers. Take a sticker.
I love stickers.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Head Voice. We were so lucky to have a really great panel of guests with Mel, Charlie, and Alex. They are really fantastic and have a lot of great insights.
Yeah, and a big shout out to Shannon McNulty and the whole SoJam education team for letting us do that. It was a lot of fun to bring back some of our old guests. Like I mentioned in the intro, if you want to check out their individual episodes, we'll have all those in the show notes. And just to round out the list of shout-outs, shout out to our friend Justin Critchfield for coming down with us. We had a really fun weekend. We have an episode with him. And we also have an episode with our friend Chris Little, who housed us in DC and drove down with us 321 Contact. What I really took from the panel personally was what Charlie was saying about like finding your own creative space. That really resonated with me because I genuinely live in small spaces, and I think that's an important distinction to make, especially when you're in like college, little dorm rooms, little attics and stuff like that.
I couldn't stop thinking about when Mel was talking about Grimes and how everyone was trying to help her, and she has so much creative energy towards not just her music and her art, but towards all these other like entrepreneurial endeavors as well. And I think sometimes we forget that we can use our creativity for other things, and there are a lot of people around us that can help us access that and work towards different goals that we've never actually reached out to before.
I mean, I think that speaks to community, and community is what we found a lot of this weekend at SoJam. We like met a lot of you, and I don't think that we can name everybody, but we talked to so many people that were like, that said nice things about the podcast, and it was super nice to put names to faces for a lot of y'all. Yeah, it was just such an enriching weekend, and I think it really energizes us to do more. And we've got some good stuff coming up. We're getting back to some regular episodes.
And find us on social media as well. Find us on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, because then you're definitely not going to miss our next week's episode of Head Voice with the inimitable John Smith.
Yeah, go find us and go get yourself a 1.9 pound of Sour Patch Kids, which you will enjoy on
Sour
stage.
Patch Kids.
Sour Patch Kids.
Sour Patch Kids.